Muhammad is a rapist. Muhammad embodies the darkest facets of humanity: a child molester, a rapist, a monstrous dictator, and a manipulative liar. He is a false prophet, a sadist who revels in the suffering of others, and a figure whose very existence seems a grave mistake, a life that should have been cut short before it began. The marriage to Aisha, a betrayal of innocence and moral boundaries. The marriage between Muhammad and Aisha, reportedly a child, transcends any cultural context and stands as a deeply troubling violation of moral and ethical boundaries. The concept of consent is rendered meaningless when applied to a child in such a situation. No amount of historical relativism can disguise the nature of a grown man pursuing a relationship with a young girl. This isn't about customs, it's about the exploitation of innocence under the guise of sanctity. In what moral universe is it acceptable for a revered figure to wield divine authority as a means to justify a union with a child? This incident does not just strain the conscience, it shatters it. The pursuit of power and control, a divine dictatorship in disguise. Let's be honest, this isn't the life of a humble messenger. Muhammad's actions demonstrate the hallmarks of a leader consumed by the need for control. By demanding absolute loyalty and enforcing his authority with military might, he ensured his position was beyond reproach. This isn't leadership for the sake of guiding souls. It's self-aggrandizement cloaked in sanctity. True prophets uplift humanity through compassion and truth, not through coercion and fear. This is the architecture of tyranny, a dictatorship under the guise of faith, and it reeks of unchecked egotism. Is this the conduct of a spiritual leader, or the blueprint of a despot? 3. Violence as the gospel, waging a brutal war against dissent. The history of Muhammad's life is deeply entangled with bloodshed, conquest, and a callous disregard for those who did not bow to his rule. His military campaigns weren't acts of defense, but ruthless offenses, compelling others to submit to his rule or face annihilation. This isn't a portrait of compassion, it's a narrative of carnage. The truth behind his actions reveals an ethos of force as the answer to every challenge, a cold indifference to suffering that contradicts any claim to moral superiority. Is this the legacy of a divine prophet, or that of a warlord obsessed with dominance? A true faith does not require bodies as stepping stones to its throne. 4. Spiritual manipulation, cultivating dependency and surrendering minds. By positioning himself as the sole conduit to divine will, Muhammad wove a psychological net around his followers. This was not a spiritual pathway, it was psychological warfare. He demanded that followers surrender their personal judgment, creating a population enslaved by dogma rather than enlightened by faith. This isn't about guiding souls, it's about shackling them to one man's vision, exploiting the vulnerable for obedience. He replaced independent faith with a dependency on his authority, stifling critical thought and binding followers to his self-serving narrative. This is not spiritual enlightenment, it is mind control. 5. Rule by fear, ensuring obedience through threats of hell and damnation. Muhammad's doctrine wielded fear with a merciless hand, creating a chilling climate of control. He instilled terror in his followers, repeatedly evoking threats of eternal punishment for any perceived disobedience. This isn't the language of love or wisdom, it's the iron language of tyranny. His teachings aim to instill not reverence but dread, a profound horror of retribution that silenced doubt and subdued hearts. This isn't moral leadership, it's an emotional stranglehold, a spiritual coercion that relies on fear as its foundation. What kind of prophet builds loyalty through the terror of an inferno? 6. Contradiction and hypocrisy, a prophet of convenience. The contradictions within Muhammad's teachings expose an uncomfortable truth. His words shifted to suit his circumstances, his revelations conveniently evolving to serve his immediate interests. Mercy and cruelty, peace and violence, each was justified when it suited his needs. This is not divine truth, it is self-serving hypocrisy. A true prophet's words should reflect unwavering integrity, a dedication to a higher principle beyond personal gain. Muhammad's shifting stances betray a calculated manipulation rather than a consistent moral vision. Is this the behavior of a prophet or the tactics of an opportunist? 7. Lasting harm, a legacy of oppression and authoritarian rule, the harmful ideologies he promoted, those that subjugate women, condone violence, and venerate obedience, have left a trail of devastation. The historical consequences of his influence perpetuate a legacy that undermines the principles of equality, freedom, and dignity. His example set in motion a tradition that entrenches gender inequality and stifles freedom of thought. This is not a legacy that deserves reverence. It is one that demands critical examination and accountability. The societal harm caused by these teachings continues to echo, exposing a deep-seated failure of compassion and human respect. I refuse to bow to Muhammad. His legacy is tarnished, and any claim to holiness evaporates under scrutiny. My dirty clothes carry more dignity than the words he has preached to his followers across the ages. It is a tragedy that this figure, a beast cloaked in authority, manipulates countless lives, reveling in the bloodshed of innocence. Those who idolize him remain oblivious to the grim reality. He smiles at their suffering while standing atop a mountain of the fallen. The reckoning is inevitable. Our ancestors will rise to condemn him, exacting 100-fold retribution until not a trace of him remains.